Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. Today, we're actually going to call it the Mark and Suzanne Show. Everybody's waiting. If I don't say the Mark and Suzanne Show, people are going to think she lied. She said Mark was going to be there. I'm turning this off. I'm going to put on Fox News.
Not a chance.
You've tuned into the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend freedom and liberty from the flames of tyranny. What does that mean? That means we are going to be unlike any other radio show you're going to be listening to this morning. I've been doing some stints on a local AM radio show, and I was told, you can come on, but just for an hour, because our listeners really want us to just read the news to them. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, you can go anywhere for that. If you want read-along story time with absolutely no insight, no waxing philosophical, go somewhere else. We ask you to do things that people don't want to do. Take a hard look at your analysis, at your consistency of your thought and your message. Are you being consistent? Are you being honest with yourself? Are you actually standing in the way of the changes that we need to effectuate to get a moral and just society? This statement was in reference to me because I had participated on this thread, but it applies to everybody here at Cerberus Radio Network. This was something that my good friend Mark Kreslins, who you just heard, he's going to be joining me momentarily, would say: unplug from the matrix. Think about things that make you uncomfortable. And this statement said that Suzanne, again, Mark, Jeff, everybody here at Cerberus Radio Network, is an equal opportunity offender, pulverizing the sacred cows of both the left and the right in the meat grinder of originalism. You can find us on Facebook, facebook.com/Cerberus Radio Network. CRN is our fan page. I have my public and private page, Suzanne Sherman, Cowgirl Esquire. You can go to both pages. They're both set to public. I think the more robust debates happen to be on my public page, so feel free to chime in. You can also chime in today. We have a phone number for live callers, 717-467-1736. Jeff Johnson's producing right now. I'm not going to ask him to chime in while he's checking all the levels. But Mark Kreslins, welcome and good morning to you.
Well, good morning to you, Suzanne. It is a thrill and an honor to be back on the air with you and speaking to your listening audience. I really am, and mean that. It is a privilege to be here with you all, and look forward to a very robust conversation as we assault the lies that so permeate our thinking today, but we don't even detect them as lies. This is one of the great problems that we face today, is really being able to distinguish truth from lies. And we don't like to admit that we may have embraced a lie. I didn't like to admit that I had embraced a lie myself, but I had. And as you know, Suzanne, Jeff, you know as well, it is entirely liberating when you finally come to the conclusion that I may have actually been wrong, but now I want to be right. It's liberating because then you're free to actually speak the truth. You don't have to couch things. You don't have to, make up stories like certain pseudo-historians do around the country to defend their positions. You get to just tell the unvarnished truth and let the truth lead you where it needs to lead you. Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free." Well, obviously, he's Lord, so anything he says is profound, but just pause and think about that for a moment. In an age of deception and lies, what is the antidote? The antidote is truth. Now, sometimes truth is hard to hear. And that is, I think, one of the great obstacles we face today, is we speak truth. The people hearing it say, they're probably right, but I don't really want them to be right, because if I'm right, then I'm wrong. Or if they're right, I'm wrong. And herein lies one of the great dangers of what we are trying to do, Suzanne and Jeff and others who are participating in this great adventure. We're trying to pry people's minds. We're trying to get them to unplug from the matrix, pry their minds from the matrix, and take the red pill, if you will, and see life for what it really is here in hashtag this exceptional American Union. It's not as rosy as we think it is. This whole establishment, this concept we call nation has been built on one lie after another after another. And I think in any civilization, you reach a kind of a tipping point. Well, Suzanne, I think we may be at that tipping point. Now, whether that tipping point takes a week or takes 17 years, I don't know. None of us ever really know that answer. But I think we're at a tipping point where so many lies have undergirded this nation, if you will, that the thread that binds it all together is being pulled right now. And when that unravels, it's going to be ugly, but it's going to be also necessary. And it's going to require your listeners, for many other people across these United States, to abandon deception, acknowledge they may have bitten into it, and repent, if you will. In other words, from the Greek, change your thinking on that, and embrace truth. Truth and only truth is what is necessary right now. And truth, by that I mean not your truth and my truth, transcendent truth. And I know, Suzanne, you've got a few topics you want to touch on that kind of define that idea.
Absolutely. You know, when we started mentioning the truth and Jesus and morality, I've had some conversations with people recently that have told me, I don't believe that Christians should allow their views to interfere with their politics. And then sits up and says, I believe in separation of church and state. Well, what you're saying here is going from, I don't think that your political views should be affected by Christianity. And that's a political view. We're not talking about public policy. What they're trying to do is cut us off at the knees before we even get there. I'm going to police your thoughts and the source of your thoughts. One gentleman who told me that he was an atheist said that we should not allow the Bible to influence our political views. Well, our political views coming from biblical influences happen to focus on self-reliance, morality, limited government, everything that the progressives, who most often happen to be, not always, atheists, support, much like the lies that we are told from a political and historic point of view. The sacred cow of St. Lincoln. I go on AM talk shows and talk about that. And people just call in and say, you're an idiot. The guy freed the slaves, or as Mark Levin would say, he's the greatest emancipator of all time, Abraham Lincoln, just like the Declaration of Independence. We'll talk about that in a little bit as well. So they don't even want our thoughts to influence our morals, our values, and stop right there. However, atheism why should their views be allowed to influence politics? We're seeing the results of that. 60 million dead babies and counting, and Christians are complicit in this. And this is the truth that Christians don't like to hear as well. Well, I'm pro-life. Well, what does that mean? And in a little while, we're going to get into what's going on in Oklahoma and how we can really effectuate a change and not just have a 5-minute discussion on what is pro-life and the courageous efforts in some of these states for babies 20 weeks or the heart rate rule that are going on right now. But why is it people seem to be okay with Christians not being invited to the political forum? Have you been coming across that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, we should have our influences everywhere but the Bible.
Yeah, well, this has been make no mistake about it. The left has its own form of religion called secular humanism. They believe that the end is man and the biological construct of the human being and the brain waves that go on in our brains, that we are the epitome, we are the ultimate, and we can ultimately set our own rules for ourselves and be a kind of a mini God, if you will. So they just wrap it around this idea of secular humanism that rejects the idea that there's transcendent truth. Well, as a Christian, and certainly even as a thinking person, transcendent truth has played a huge role in all of recorded history. This idea that there's a greater truth that supersedes man's ability to even understand truth. So, for example, we know the famous passage in the sixth commandment, Exodus 22, thou shalt not murder. That's a transcendent truth that originates from God. He established this idea that he's the creator of the world. And insofar as he's the creator of the world, we are image bearers. We bear the image of God. We somehow are look like him or think like him. We are in some way an image bearer. We reflect him somehow. He establishes the superiority of mankind when he says, now go and take dominion over the world. Man is above animal. Man, this transcendent concept is beginning to gel. Man is greater than animal because Adam, if you take that literally or allegorically, Adam, you name all the animals and you subdue them. You subdue the world for your purposes. Man is now the supreme being, but under him, under God, in the context of living on this planet. And so in that context, he says, don't murder. A transcendent idea. Don't murder. It doesn't say thou shalt not kill. Killing must happen at times. If you break into my home, you're going to get killed. I am going to discharge my weapon at you. And if it hits you in the right spot, after trying to hurt my family, you are going to be killed. But that's not murder. Murder implies a malicious motive behind it. Some kind of motive occurs when you think about murder, and it's malicious. I'm going to take your life. The guy breaking into my home, he's malicious. He is trying to hurt my family. Me killing him is a just response to that. But he's the one that's breaking the law. He's trying to hurt my family, perhaps even murder my family. Well, so we have this transcendent truth. God says, thou shalt not murder. Why? Because you've been created in the image, in my image, and I don't want you to murder another image bearer. I don't want you to do that. Now, as progressive secularists, humanists think, well, some people are less than others. And so, like in the Ukraine, if we need their grain to support the Soviet expansion, then we will kill a few million of them. Excuse me, I'm trying to get my dog out of here. A few million of them. We will kill a few million if we have to take their land from us. Nazi Germany, this other secular humanist enterprise. Well, the Jews are the source of our problems. So we're going to murder some of them. In fact, we're going to murder 6 million of them. Pol Pot. It's the intellectuals that caused all this uprising here in Cambodia. So we're going to murder some of them. Now, you have transcendent truth, God saying, thou shalt not murder. You've been created in my image, and you cannot use malice as a motivation to take that person's life. And you have secular humanists over here saying, the heck with this transcendent truth stuff. We may need to murder a few people to exercise our domination, to exercise our control, to exercise our progressive ideas. Underlying the Christian ethos is a respect for life. It is a recognition that life is originating in a creator. We see that even in our own foundational document, don't we? We see that the founders understood that life originates from something outside ourselves, some transcendent being, some being above ourselves. Well, as humans, we don't like the idea of people being above us. We don't like authority. We don't like the audacity of a God saying, thou shalt not murder. Yet, secular humanism, its own kind of religion, creates a secondary God, a lowercase g God. It is you. It is me. My truth is what matters. Your truth doesn't matter to me. If it runs counter to my truth, I will just murder you. And then you have the transcendent being, God. Why don't saying thou shalt not murder? Why don't secular humanists want the Bible in public policy? Because it transcends them. It's a threat to their power. It's a threat to their ability, ultimately, to murder you if you get in their way. This is a major spiritual battle, folks, that we are engaged in right now. Make no mistake about it. The secularist, the progressive left has its own form of religion, secular humanism. It elevates man above all else. And man, when combined with power, can do very bad things to you.
And you hit the nail on the head, because the secular humanism groups are the ones saying it is okay to murder if we, the government, and under auspices and color of law, say it's okay to do so for the greater good. Once again, they are taking a theory here, they are twisting it to their own purpose, because really, can you come up with a bigger murderer than the governments around this world? I think it is, what, 200 million so far at the hands of communist governments. And you know, Hitler, you mentioned Hitler. Well, he was a piker compared to us. We're 60 million and counting. So let's stop talking about Hitler. Let's look at our own selves. Well, how can you say that? You're enslaving women. You Christians are enslaving women. You're going to tie them to the table and force them to give birth. Let's take a moment now, since we went down this road. We have some other things we can cover later to dispel some of the myths, because when you were on last time, we were talking about a very important race for the governorship in Oklahoma. That's Dan Fisher, the only politician that I have heard of to this date that is standing for the complete and total abolition, as opposed to regulation, of human abortion. And that's going on right now. That really ties into our discussion of government-sanctioned murder. We know, we always come across, well, you're enslaving women if you're forcing them to have these babies. What about the cases of rape, incest, saving the life of the mother? And Roe versus Wade, the court has spoken. I'm going to let you address some of these, because I know as part of, I know Dan Fisher's campaign has done this very well, and we had a show with him on here, but let's have you freshen up these ideas. We have a lot of people talking about this. My son was even asking me about some of these, so I know he and his friends hear what we're saying too. So maybe we can reach these younger people and get them to understand that what they've been taught from the pro-choice movement. Another thing that drives me crazy, and it's a short drive, is I'm not pro-abortion, I'm pro-choice. You're saying you are still pro the murder of unborn children. You're trying to defend or say that you're protecting a vulnerable group of society, the women who need their rights. I would say the women are the most elevated status in the world right now. Who else can kill their children at will and have not only an escape from punishment, but have other people pay for it? Tell me about inequality. So let's run with some of these myths and what we're doing, what you're doing, and this organization called Free the States. Yeah, great. Thank you for letting me talk about this as well, Suzanne, because there is a growing movement across these United States. We are contacted routinely at freethestates.org from people across the country saying, how can I get something like this going in my state? And we're working actually on a model right now. The idea being that the states right now are held captive. Thus the name Free the States. We are, because we truly are held captive. I cannot tell you one of the most dismaying ideas related to abolishing abortion is how frequently conservatives, how frequently Christian conservatives will say, we can't because the Supreme Court has ruled already. And I step back now. I have to be careful here myself. There was an old preacher friend of mine that taught me years and years ago, when you're pointing a finger out at the audience, remember this 3-point right back at you. So I have to point them back at myself and say, there was a time when certainly I would have made that argument that the best solution to ending the abortion holocaust, and make no mistake about it, this is a holocaust. In fact, as Suzanne just said a few moments ago, compared to other holocausts that we acknowledge through recorded history, they're all pikers compared to what we're doing. We've already murdered 60 million and counting.
So,
and by the way, in Nazi Germany, you didn't see the citizens standing there protesting and demanding and celebrating the fact that these camps were in operation. They weren't cheering on the smoke coming from the chimneys out there.
Truly is sick.
But we're having our lattes, getting our nails done, and having the abortions all together. One big happy mini mall strip mall family. Shame on us. Okay, go ahead.
Shame on us. No, you're exactly right. So in this, with this as a backdrop, Free the States is trying to actually free the states from the tyranny of control by Washington, D.C., control by 9 politically connected lawyers in black dresses. Thus the term free the states. The states are held captive, and sadly, way, way, way too many people still believe that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter. I deal with this every day, Suzanne. Every day I deal with somebody trying to knock down this straw man argument, this red herring that the Supreme Court is the final arbiter. Says who? Says who? Well, but they ruled in Roe. So what? At what point do we, the people who are supposedly those who are in charge of this government, at what point do we say, the hell with the Supreme Court? Well, here in Oklahoma, that's where we are. And I'm telling you, this unshackling of the mind that is going on down here is really a sight to behold. Our organization, the organization I'm involved in, I know Dan Fisher very well. He's a very close friend of mine. I know why he's running. I know what he's running on. I know his motivation, why he's doing this. Now, I'm not involved in the campaign at all because I can't be. I'm helping this 501c4 social welfare organization educate people on abolition, on why abolition is the only moral, biblical, ethical, and intellectually consistent model or strategy to use out there. Forget this pro-life stuff. Just get rid of the phrase. Get rid of the term pro-life. It needs to be replaced with abolition. Well, Dan Fisher and his campaign is doing a remarkable job of advancing these arguments. But in that context, I deal with people all the time. I think well-meaning people who have been told their entire adult lives that the Supreme Court's the final arbiter. Well, Mark, we can't end abortion because the Supreme Court won't let us. Well, the hell with the Supreme Court, excuse my French. At some point, where is the desire to save those babies' lives going to overwhelm our fear of even saying no to the Supreme Court? I mean, Suzanne, I'm writing an article right now referring to the Lincoln legacy. We've talked about this many times. There is a large group of people that actually believe this idea. We have two choices when it comes to abortion. We can either submit to the Supreme Court ruling, or we can defy them and prepare to be murdered by the federal government. They're going to kill us. And I'm not even kidding around. I'm dealing with a guy right now, actually, on this very issue. Pretty bright guy. He has reduced abolishing abortion to two. We have two choices: comply or die. Yeah. As if there's no other solution.
That's pretty much, that applies to pretty much any law.
Yeah,
of government. You know, if your kid has a lemonade stand and the police show up and you say, pound sand, get out of here. They say, put your hands behind your back. No, I'm not going to do that. You don't comply. The guns will come out.
Yeah. So here's the
cigarettes out of the package. Okay, go ahead.
Here's where I draw people's attention to what is happening right now. Right, contemporary United States of America, circa 2018. We have many states that are in open defiance to federal law right now on recreational marijuana. They're totally flaunting the law. We border Colorado. I can drive probably 2.5 hours north, and if I wanted to, cross into Colorado and buy a bag of recreational marijuana. Totally flaunting the federal government. I mean, totally. Notwithstanding Jeff Sessions threatening, to bring pain to bear on the producers of and resellers of marijuana there. His threats obviously are idle. As far as I'm aware, I don't think I've heard of the 4th Infantry Division parachuting into Colorado yet and indiscriminately shooting the resellers of marijuana in Colorado Springs. I've not heard any. Suzanne, are you aware of any reports that are breaking right now that the 4th Infantry Division is about to storm across the borders of Colorado and start shooting Coloradans?
They'd be spread pretty thin because it's legal in California. All the states are touting these laws. I think 26 states have some form of legalization. And, you know, the thing is, by allowing some states to do it and having people kind of feel a little bit more free about it, it gives them the opportunity to keep the civil asset forfeiture money-making scheme rolling. So they can keep doing what they're doing, but the key is, again, to let the states decide what this is. And I wish, notwithstanding Oklahoma, the pro-life people had the fortitude and the temerity of the people that want to grow a plant.
Exactly,
you know, if they have the backbone to stand up for the most vulnerable members of our society that they do for the right to grow and use a plant, I am of the opinion that it should be decriminalized altogether. Because the liberty-minded people say, well, let's legalize it so they can tax it and use it for income. Well, then you're bringing it back to the same exact spot, and it expands more government. In fact, we have a movement going on for medical marijuana in Utah, and I was discussing the actual bill with Ben McClintock from Defending Utah out here, and the bill is really a Trojan horse, much like national reciprocity, only invites more government participation, expansion of government intervention, and the people that will qualify to get these permits to have medical marijuana are the well-connected. They are the already wealthy. They have to have $500,000 put away. They cannot speak about marijuana a certain way. So you see infringements upon free speech rights, which we have in the Utah Constitution. I'm not citing First Amendment rights. So, you know, whenever we have some of this, we get more government. So we're done. We should be done with regulating abortion. And again, tax dollars go to Planned Parenthood, who in turn take that money and donate it back to the Democrat Party. The whole thing is embroiled in corruption and death. So we have somebody that's willing to stand up to it. And if you are pro-life, I had some people that are prominent members of the pro-Trump Republican Party out here in Utah touting pro-life. I said, you're a bunch of cowards. Abolition is the way to go. Well, what do you mean? And I mentioned Dan and the campaign, and the lady said, you know, I think you're right. And then we had the discussion, well, you know, the Supreme Court has spoken and you can't just force these women, you know, the whole thing. So let's talk a little bit about, we have the federalism idea is clearly in our favor. Roe versus Wade was an unconstitutional opinion premised on the 14th Amendment and a deliberate misinterpretation of the 14th Amendment. And it was cloaked under the right to privacy. So if we can get back to federalism and let the people of Oklahoma, through their duly elected representatives and Governor Dan Fisher, we hope and pray, it is a matter for them to decide. We're not talking about a national ban on abortion. I would like to see a constitutional amendment. That's the way to go. But let's dispel some of the myths that I think keep people from really being on board. Well, what about rape? What about incest? Are there really situations where it's needed to save the life of a mother, where 1.5-pound babies are being put in incubators that are preemies? Can you kind of clear up some of these concerns, people that might not be ready to jump on board with the abolition movement that might sway them?
Well, and I would start by saying you really haven't thought through your morality if you have concluded that rape, incest, or the life of the mother justifies murder. We haven't thought that through. It's been a very clever pitch that has been put out there by the pro-choice community, the pro-abortion community. They always find wiggle room to free to pry people's minds open to letting in more of this decadent idea that murder is justifiable under any circumstance. Let's back up a minute here to the beginning of the show. We talked about transcendent truth. Does God, the God of the universe, does he say, thou shalt not murder unless you've been raped. Now you can murder your child. Thou shalt not murder unless there's incest. If there's incest, does God give those exceptions? Or does he just issue a blanket, unequivocal statement, thou shalt not murder? Now, when a woman carries her baby into an abortion clinic to fulfill her appointment with her executioner, with her baby's executioner, the doctor, she is at a minimum an accessory to murder. Now, whether it could be decided in a court of law that she is an accessory to the point of first degree, that's up to the courts to settle that, and statute written under the idea of murder. But she's carried her baby into that abortion. The baby doesn't get there any other way. The baby does not drive itself to the abortion clinic to be murdered. It is, against its will, taken into a killing center and murdered. Now, the pro-life community that I think has erred gravely in this regard has accepted the premise of the pro-choice argument, which is murder is allowable, permissible, and even justifiable. Now, it's hard for the pro-choice community to make the argument that a woman, they make it. I'm not saying they don't make it. It's just hard for them to say a woman should have some superintendent right to murder her child for convenience. It just sounds bad. I mean, can you imagine NARAL taking out an ad? They may at some point. I mean, we are slipping backwards. So there may come a point where they take out a TV ad campaign that says a woman is a goddess and she should be allowed to sacrifice her child for any reason at any time. But at least right now in circa 2018, that's a challenging argument for them to make. What is not challenging for them to make is to say, well, come on, Mark, that woman was raped. How can you deny her the freedom to terminate? Notice they don't use the word murder, to terminate her pregnancy. They are masterful at twisting language, twisting terms. The pro-life person hears that and they think, well, you're right. It was a crime. The woman was murdered. Oh my gosh, how do I answer this? How do I answer this? How do I answer this? Oh no, I don't have an answer. Yeah, you're probably right. We do need to give exceptions for rape, murder, and rape and incest. And before you know it, unwittingly, the moral Christian conservative who will say, God says thou shalt not murder, will totally add an exception to God's pronouncement. They'll say, yeah, I know, Mark, God says thou shalt not murder, but we live in America. You know, in order to be politically viable as a movement, we've got to allow this rape and exception option. And this is why I started out with people haven't thought through their morality yet. They haven't really engaged that they are embracing a pro-choice argument. You see, because they embrace that a woman should be allowed, now frame it this way, and it changes the entire thing. My good friend Randy Brogdon, who I work with on Free the States, he's a former state senator and former gubernatorial candidate down here, almost won the governor's office back in 2010, missed it by 4 points. There would be Governor Brogdon we'd be saying goodbye to right now. But anyways, as a state senator, he wrote the first ultrasound bill in Oklahoma. He has released a very gripping repentant video for writing that bill. He has said to me here just yesterday, we were talking, he said, you know, Mark, had I framed that bill, had the title of that bill been, you are allowed to murder your child after you see an ultrasound, I would never have ever authored that bill. To the pro-life community, it sounds like, oh, we've got a victory here. We're going to make a woman see an ultrasound before she chooses to murder her child. Do you see how clever the pro-abortion community has been using language against us? We don't know what to do with it. Oh no, what do I do? I'm panicked. I'm being asked how do I handle rape and incest? I panic. I don't know how to answer that. And yet, and so in that regard, they have been dominating the debate. Well, now we've got a guy that shows up on the stage, Dan Fisher, who knows how to handle all those debates.
And, you know, this is a problem, backing up really quick. This is a problem not just in what I call the most important issue. We are literally trying to save lives here. But this is a problem we have. I don't care if it is pro-big government, the progressives, National Rifle Association with our God-given gun rights. They set the stage. They set the tone for the debate. And when we try to back away from the Christian values and Christian arguments, going back to the beginning of the show, because we're kind of cowed into thinking that we shouldn't interpose our beliefs on others. We're really just trying to save lives, be personally responsible, but they set the tone and shame us. And we're allowing them to hide their nefarious goals by obfuscating their purpose with pleasant words and distractions, calling an abortionist an executioner will raise some hackles in the pro-life movement. They should be calling them executioners already. We are so happy with feel-good platitudes and just having the conversation without results. Saying a mother bringing her baby to the executioner and calling her an accessory to murder. Kreslins, that's too much. Wait, no, you big dummy.
You big dummy.
You guys are so extreme to do this. Well, if this woman carried her toddler to a place knowing that this baby was going to be hacked up with a knife and put through a blender, she'd be arrested and locked up for life, as would be the executioner murderer. Mm-hmm. We have to stop shying away and embracing euphemisms and calling this horrific practice out for what it is. We're seeing on social media pictures. At Dan Fisher's presentation, I saw for the first time those babies being taken out of the mother's bodies. They weren't giving birth. They were giving death.
That's tough to see, isn't it?
That got me right to my soul. And people need to see this. And there are pictures you see of the babies that are victims of these abortions. I don't want to see this on Facebook.
Yeah.
Well, you need to.
Yeah.
You need to.
Well, here's one word that the pro-abortion community is terrified of. It is the word that, as it continues to build out, which it is, will change the entire debate. The word is murder. They don't want to allow that word into this debate because it has implications, right? So they've gotten away with termination of pregnancy. They've gotten away with abortion. They've gotten away with crisis pregnancy. They've gotten away with unwed mothers. They've gotten away with a physician providing health care services to women. They've gotten away. They've defined every term of the debate. And those who believe in transcendent truth, conservatives who have a moral framework that originates in transcendent truth, we try to counter their stupid ideas, when there's always been one word that'll change the entire debate. If the Christian community will adhere to it, it is murder. Why? Because now that takes us right back to the sixth commandment. The God of the universe is telling us, you shall not murder. Make no mistake about it. When that mother carries her baby into that killing center, she is there to murder her child. I don't care what her background. Okay, you know what, Suzanne? You ticked me off today. I'm going to murder you. Would anybody let me get away with that? Jeff, would you say, Mark, I sympathize with you. Suzanne's been a little bit irritable this last month.
There are many that would.
we're a little annoyed by her. So, yeah, you can murder her. So, and that's an extreme. But let's just examine the premise of the pro-life or the pro-choice, pro-abortion community. They believe there is a time for justifiable murder. Now, I'm not saying justifiable killing or even homicide, murder with malicious intent. Again, go back to the Hebrew. It is why God says he doesn't say thou shalt not kill. In the Hebrew, it is thou shalt not murder. God has a different standard, understandably so. There comes a point where killing is totally justifiable. Totally justifiable. Murder is never justifiable. That's why the pro-abortion community does not want this word out there. They do not want the they do not want what you and I saw in that video, where we saw a baby's body separated from its head. They do not want to let that be framed as murder, because they have no argument to that. If it gets framed as, folks, stop and listen for a moment. If we frame this argument properly, that is murder, what is the pro-abortion going to say? Crowd going to say? It's justifiable? Murder is not justifiable. They lose the argument completely. Dan Fisher down here is making that argument. Randy Brogdon, my friend over here at freethestates.org, are making that argument. We are advancing those ideas. This isn't a choice, guys. This is unadulterated murder that you are watching, that you are allowing in your stink up your community. We have 4 abortion clinics in pro-life Christian Oklahoma. 4. We're about to open a 5th. What does that say about our Christianity here? A friend of mine said recently, just yesterday, he said, it's not that Oklahoma isn't pro-life enough. It's that Oklahoma isn't Christian enough. We don't actually act like Christians. We don't act like what we say we believe here in Oklahoma. We sing a good song here, and we have churches at every corner. But right now, what time is it now? It's 9:41 here in Oklahoma. The abortion mills have been up and fired up, and their boilers running for about 45 minutes. They've probably murdered 1 or 2 babies by now.
As we speak right now, a life is being extinguished. And, you mentioned that they wouldn't say, yeah, it's murder, but it's justifiable. They have used that. I forgot who the woman was, but she was up speaking at a pro-choice convention saying, I was pregnant, but the time wasn't right for me. So I had an abortion, and everybody cheered. If we were in a moral or just society, she would have been dragged out of the room in shackles.
Let me interject one point there. I knew who you're talking about. It was at the Democrat National Convention for Hillary. And she was applauded, roundly cheered. Here's what she didn't use. She didn't use the word murder, because she can't. Right. She can't stand up there and say, the time wasn't right for me, so I murdered my child. She can't. That's the word. It forces them back on their heels. Right now, they force us back on our heels all the time. Well, what about the baby, the child that's been raped, Mark? Well, so what you're essentially saying is we're going to punish the sins of the father onto the child by murdering it. Is that a moral and just society? So the child's been raped, so we're impregnated, so we're now going to commit another crime to resolve the previous crime.
I heard that justified once by somebody saying, I said, look, the progressives love to have a double standard here. Under the incident of rape, it is okay to murder an unborn baby. One woman actually said to me, but you really don't want those aggressive genes passed on. Oh, gosh. So now we're going to have some sort of genetic engineering. We're seeing that in China. You had a guest on your show whose brother was murdered by the government. So now we're going to decide who lives and dies based on desirable personality traits. The other thing is they obfuscate both the act and the victim. The act is a medical procedure. It's women's health. The victim is not a human baby. Let's call it, I murdered that woman. The timing wasn't right for me. I decided to murder my unborn human baby. Mm-hmm. I've seen these babies described as my own OBGYN. I lost a baby in between my two. And I had some medical issues. And I heard her describe an unborn baby as tissue of conception. How sanitized is that? you know, we remove tumors and call them tissues. Cancerous tumors are removed. I've heard babies referred to in those terms as tumors, even parasites. A parasite seeks out a host and sucks the blood off of an unwitting host for its own needs. That is not the situation with the baby whatsoever. But if it makes them feel good to say that, it puts us on the ropes. It's time to put this evil and the people on the ropes that are propagating and supporting this evil and make them confront the truth and the reality. And if you call yourself pro-life and feel good about yourself, you shouldn't, because you're not doing enough and you're not speaking the truth. When you say you're pro-life, you are saying I'm pro-life, except for the ones that the law says it's okay to kill. As you mentioned earlier, God did not give exceptions. And they win by putting us on the ropes. They set the time. And look at, you know, let's have a little truth in advertising here. Okay, how many of us have seen those Chinese restaurants, Korean restaurants? They have the pictures of all the foods, all the wares that they sell inside that store. How about we go to that Planned Parenthood I showed you a picture of in Los Altos, next to the nail salon and all, and the Starbucks, and have pictures of these babies up on the wall. Show if you're proud of what you do. Show it to your customers. Put it out there.
Suzanne, see, when we go on the offensive, and see, they have been on the offensive since 1973, and they have totally won the fight, the war of words, up until this point. This is why it's so essential that we begin to introduce the concept of murder when it comes to what's happening to these babies. Like I just said, probably 2 of them murdered already. There's been no SWAT team response to the abortion clinics here in Oklahoma. There's no detective being sent out there. There's no district attorney who's going to then file charges against the murderers. There's no judge who's going to hear the case. Yet that baby, there's 2 babies that have probably been murdered so far here in Oklahoma. We're given no due process. We're legally murdered because of how we understand Supreme Court opinions. And we can't find a way yet, though we are, let me rephrase that. Up until here recently, we've not found a way to defeat their arguments. We just keep, giving into it. Well, you're right. Probably the only way to get anything done nowadays is to put an exceptions clause in there. My gosh, these are from pastors. These are from deeply committed Christians who will say, we have to provide an exception for murder. They haven't. That's why I started out my discourse on this. You haven't really thought through your own morality. I didn't myself, because I used to believe in exceptions. I can remember speaking to a group of legislators, telling them the only politically viable way to get anything done is to have an exceptions clause in there. Now, I would have told you back then I was a fairly serious Christian. I was sharing the gospel. I was serving people. I was caring for my wife and my family. I was doing things that I believed God expected me to do as a Christian man. Yet here I am standing in front of a group of power brokers saying the only way we get anything done is to put the exceptions clause in there. I had created a dichotomy in my mind without realizing I had done that. Now, when somebody confronted me on it and applied the word murder to it, well, how can I justify murdering a child, a baby in the womb, because that baby was conceived in a crime? Do we commit another crime to resolve the first crime? That's just a silly notion. And this is why this word murder must become part of our dialect when we are discussing this issue, because they have no answer to it. If I'd have gone to that woman on that stage at the Democratic National Convention and said, so you believed that you had the right to murder your child because the time wasn't right. Now, she'd have backpedaled and she'd have said, well, it's the Supreme Court has ruled that we have the freedom of choice under the 9th Amendment, the right to privacy. We have this right. And so I'm merely exercising my constitutional right. But then I would just keep pressing in. Oh, so you believe that there is actually a constitutional right to murder. Now, this is important to really get. Murder does have a definition. Now, there's homicide. Suzanne, you're an attorney, so you are going to get this better than others.
You know, I'm ashamed to say, I'll interject really quick with the legal definition. I had a friend in California before her time, before I even, she was so outspoken on this cause. And I'm ashamed to say, I was kind of embarrassed. We were at the gym on our treadmill, and she was in a very loud voice saying, abortion is murder in California. God love her. And I'm sitting there saying, Carolyn, shh, you know, X-nay on the murder day, you know, stop.
Yeah,
this is embarrassing. Yeah. You know, but this is the thing. Murder, and I tried in my best lawyer-like abilities to say, well, murder is defined as the unlawful killing of a human being by another human being. And the Supreme Court has ruled that abortion is not unlawful, therefore it can't be murder. God forgive me. I have to repent. What I felt back then. And, you know, the other thing too is the inconsistency that we see from the left, that very much with regards to DACA and deportation of kids, you know, that were born here when their families came here illegally, or the kids that were brought here with their parents illegally. We don't want to punish the children for the acts of the parents. Same thing with school busing. You know what? I was punished for the acts of others. I had nothing to do with segregation, racism in other schools, but we were a victim of this. They love to punish others for the act. So they're inconsistent. We are punishing the child for the act of a rapist father. We are punishing other kids, changing their whole lives, their parents, where they moved to for certain reasons, to go to the community school. But all of a sudden now that doesn't apply.
And they've gotten away with it because we have no answer. We don't have a robustness to our arguments because we're actually trying to defeat a flawed argument that we've accepted the premise of right out of the gate. So we argue on their territory and wonder why we can't win. Well, we need to establish new ground, a new ground to fight on. Let me take you to Title 18 U.S. Code, Section 1111, definition of murder. Murder is the unlawful killing of a human being with malice aforethought. Simple. Not hard to understand. Let's pretend 18 U.S. Code was the definitive explanation of murder. Now, of course, it's not. I believe the Sixth Commandment is. God establishes very clearly what murder is. It is malice aforethought. It is, I intend to hurt you. I intend to take your life from you. That's malice. I'm going to do this unlawfully. I'm not authorized to take your life. I have malice in my heart with what I'm about to do to you. How else can an abortion be described? Is there any other way to describe what happens to that baby in that room when that executioner, masquerading as a doctor, performs a horrific, and I mean horrific, practice on that baby at the consent of the mother laying there? Is that malicious? Is that malice aforethought? Did she intend? Did she accidentally? Well, Your Honor, I accidentally drove into that abortion clinic. I walked in to see if they could give me directions where to go. Before you know it, I wound up on the table, and this doctor was executing my... Of course, she walked in there with malice in her heart.
And before that, she considered it. She made a phone call, made an appointment. There is, you know, when we were studying the concept of murder in law school, malice aforethought, they said, was really nothing that you can define. It can be a few seconds. This is definitely more than a few seconds. Yeah, yes. We're going to take a break and come back. This is the Cerberus Radio Network having a really, really difficult conversation. If you are one that says, I am pro-life, you're not going to like this conversation that we're having today. But this is what we do here. We ask for consistency, and we ask you to always look at yourself. What can we do different? How can we change our frame of mind to actually make an improvement. I was accused the other day of just grumbling and complaining and bashing everything. And I told this person, do you ever listen to my show? Do you ever listen to what our solutions are? When we come back from the break with Mark Kreslins, we're going to discuss what's going to happen in the state of Oklahoma. We have a Dan Fisher for governor who was elected, and what happens then, and what the federal government is going to do, and how we can combat that. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back momentarily. This is the Cerberus Radio Network, defending liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny.
For the last time, I'm pretty sure what's killing the crops is this Brondo stuff.
The Brondo's got what plants crave. It's got electrolytes.
So wait a minute. What you're saying is that you want us to put water on the crops?
Yes.
Water? Like out the toilet?
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be out of the toilet, but yeah, that's the idea.
But Brondo's got what plants crave.
It's got electrolytes.
Okay, look. The plants aren't growing. So I'm pretty sure that the Brondo's not working. Now, I'm no botanist, but I do know that if you put water on plants, they grow.
Well, I've never seen no plants grow out of no toilet.
Hey, that's good. You sure you ain't the smartest guy in the world?
Yeah.
Okay, look, you want to solve this problem. I want to get my pardon, so why don't we just try it, okay? And not worry about what plants crave.
Brondo's got what plants crave.
Yeah, it's got electrolytes.
What are electrolytes? Do you even know?
It's what they use to make Brondo.
Yeah, but why did they use them to make Brondo?
Because Brondo's got electrolytes.
Suzanne Sherman shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics. The Wasatch Report, every Monday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern, on the Cerberus Radio Network. Cerberus Radio Network, protecting liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the second hour. We are doing a special 2-hour show with Mark Kreslins today, the Wasatch Report, here on the Cerberus Radio Network. We're discussing the lies that we are allowing ourselves to propagate when it comes to the human abortion issue. We're calling out the truth here. It is murder. It is unjustifiable. And Dan Fisher is running for government in the state of Oklahoma. This is an issue that is rightly left to the states. We were discussing earlier in the first segment of the show, the first hour, at the convention, Democrat convention for Hillary Clinton, and a woman saying, I had an abortion, the time wasn't right for me. It reminded me of an interview with Hillary Clinton where they asked if a baby had constitutional rights, right to life, due process, liberty, up to the day it is born. Because if she said it did not, she would be saying it is okay to take a perfectly viable human being and murder it. Just chop it on up. She's not going to say that. So Hillary Clinton, being the, sidestepping snake that she is, smiled and said, well, I believe in Roe versus Wade. And everybody cheered. That was all that was required to say Roe versus Wade, conversation over. Roe versus Wade was an illegitimate decision. The court had no business hearing it in the first place. So when people say the case has been settled, it has not. We have a man that is finally brave enough, courageous enough to take a stand. We have an organization called Free the States that is supporting him and saying, no, this has got to stop. This is murder. And Roe versus Wade, the federal government, if you try to defy the laws of the people of Oklahoma, we will defy you. So what's going to happen now, Mark? We have criminalization of this atrocious behavior. And now before the ink is even dry, when Dan signs that law, we're going to have a federal court injunction. Dan's going to send the police out to close off these abortuariums, these killing centers. What now?
Well, I don't want to, so I'm obviously very aware of the strategy. Don't want to play our hand too much here at this stage of the game because there's a certain sequence of things that need to occur to effectuate the change that needs to happen. So I don't want to go into too much detail on that right now. When Governor Fisher lowers his left hand, just rest assured there will be a sequence of events that occur that'll make it very clear that Oklahoma is reasserting its state sovereign rights. The people of Oklahoma have all the power necessary to defy federal law on this, a federal court opinion. And this governor intends to use it. Now, here's one of the byproducts of the Fisher for governor candidacy and even our discussion today of framing the argument properly. It's remasculinized Christianity, if you will. It has made us brave again. We're willing to say that's murder. We're willing to say, like you just used the word evil. We're willing to call it what it is. Rather than try to be clever and dance around their terms, termination of pregnancy, abortion, unwanted pregnancy, life of the mother, all these obfuscation tools that they use that have totally sidetracked the conservative Christian community in these United States. We're going on the offensive now. And we're saying we're not going to let you murder your child under the color of law in Oklahoma anymore. Now, that doesn't mean some women won't attempt to have an abortion. They will. I can almost guarantee that after state sovereignty is restored, the 5 abortion clinics in Oklahoma have been shut down. Some woman is going to attempt to have an abortion. She's going to use whatever device she chooses, and she's going to end up in an emergency room. And she's going to show up, and the doctor is going to realize this is a botched abortion. Well, 2 things are going to happen by statute at that point. Number one, the woman is going to be cared for. If the baby has survived, the baby will be cared for. Number 2, an immediate phone call will go out to the local police because a crime has occurred in Oklahoma. The police will show up and she will be arrested. Now, whether she's taken away to jail will depend on the physician clearing her to go to jail or not. But at some point, she'll wind up in jail. Now, she'll be afforded due process because everybody's involved in this effort is for due process. She will be taken before a court, and she will be given all the rights any charged felon would be granted. The right to an attorney if she cannot afford one. The right to remain silent. She doesn't say a word. All those rights will apply to her. But make no mistake about it, she will be arrested, incarcerated until either she's released on her own recognizance or she's bonds out, she's staying in jail. And there will be a date certain where she is going to stand before a judge or a jury of her peers, and she will be tried as a criminal for attempting or murdering her child. Now, stop and think about the paradigm shift we're talking about here. Just get your minds around that for a second. Think of the paradigm shift that occurred. Now, I know you have a show on your network called The Paradigm Shift, but this is what's necessary. This is why that word murder is so important, that we become comfortable using in this dialogue, because the pro-abortion community puts us back on, not me, but puts the pro-life community back on their heels all the time. It's time for us to go on the offensive with not just legal truth, section 18 U.S. Code section 1111, but God's transcendent truth. Thou shalt not murder.
And this is exactly why they don't want faith interfering with their agenda. This is going to put, by the way, the case you mentioned, the hypothetical case of a woman being charged with murder for attempting to murder her baby or for the successful completion of that task. What's going to happen is we're going to go to federal court if she's convicted, because it's going to be they're going to allege a constitutional right that was violated. And we're also going to see a federal court injunction They're going to enjoin the closing.
And we're going to ignore that. So
exactly.
This
so
is
hold on.
I want to jump in here.
Hold on, Jeff, 1 second. This puts the government in the untenable position of using, as you mentioned, calling in an airstrike or using lethal force against individuals, and not just Christians. We have our good friend Andrew out in Pennsylvania, who is an avowed secularist. This is not a Christian issue. This is a humanity and human decency issue. It puts them in the untenable position of using which will be lethal force against people trying to save the lives of the most vulnerable, the most disenfranchised member of society, the unborn. Go ahead, Jeff.
Twice you've used a term that we have railed against on your show, my show, for months now. You said twice constitutional rights. And here is the problem with those terms, because now you're giving government the ability to grant rights. Whether it's a second, you demand your second, I demand my Second Amendment constitutional right, or I demand my constitutional right to murder the baby. It doesn't matter. Either way, you're granting government the ability to grant civil rights. And here's the problem. You're giving them the ability to take away natural rights, the natural right to life, the natural right to self-preservation. So by giving away this, your absolute moral superiority on this, because you are morally superior in this whole thing.
Exactly.
Because you're standing on transcendent truth, but you're giving them the power by saying, oh, I demand my constitutional rights. Now you're giving them now you're allowing them to make up whatever they want. Murder babies, take away your rights, whatever it is.
They decide who lives or dies. And we saw how well that worked for Alfie in England.
Yeah.
The government used lethal force to ensure that this baby would be imprisoned and not treated until he died. We cut you off. Carry on with your thought, Mark.
This is one of the great disappointments about the modern iteration of talk radio, is it's robbed itself of what it actually could do. Now, we know there are some large programs out there, Rush Limbaugh being one of them, who speaks to millions of people every day. Now, imagine if he adopted this mindset that we have here on your guys' radio network and what we're talking about today in the show. Imagine the minds that would shift, that wouldn't be so weak-kneed and lily-leafed, if you will, about this issue, would not run away in terror discussing this issue. Like you had mentioned earlier in the gym, wouldn't have said, shh, we can't talk about this in present company. Imagine if we felt like we could go on the offensive. Well, as Jeff just said, we actually can go on the offensive because this is transcendent truth. So let's roll the clock back to your question earlier. We're going to be enjoined. We fully anticipate a politically connected lawyer in a black dress enjoining Oklahoma and preventing it from carrying forth its constitutional responsibilities within the state constitution. Well, the first act of state sovereignty is going to be to ignore that court. We're just not going to go. Now, you said this is the pivot point, Suzanne. You just nailed the pivot point. We order our attorney general not to show up in court. Don't go there, because we do not recognize your jurisdiction over this issue. The state of Oklahoma has spoken through the election of Governor Fisher. It does not recognize it's as if I'm being told to see something red that I can't even see. There is no, you keep telling me there's red over there. I don't see red. I don't see your jurisdiction over this issue. I don't recognize it. You may keep telling me it's there. The press may come and say, but Governor Fisher, aren't you going to respond to, or Attorney General Hunter, aren't you going to respond to the federal request for you to come into court? We expect both of them to say, you're telling me, what are you saying to me? I don't recognize you have any. It's really a blindness to it. That's the kind of authority, that's the kind of conviction we need to have. I'm not going to discuss with you about that. I'm not going to discuss this issue with you, politically connected lawyer in a black dress. You don't have that jurisdiction here. we have these people in custody, and either you're going to do one of two things, because you're not actually challenging the people of Oklahoma. You're challenging the people's representatives, the government of Oklahoma. If you're going to shoot anybody, you're going to be shooting fellow elected government officials, because it's going to be Dan Fisher standing down there in front of that jail where that woman is arrested or the physicians are incarcerated. Now, government to government, is this a legitimate government? Think about this for a moment, what I'm about to say. Is this government worthy of any legitimacy that would say we, the federal government, have the right to potentially murder the governor of Oklahoma? Can we possibly provide any legitimacy to this government, the federal government, that would dare threaten a properly elected governor by the people of Oklahoma with murder if he won't get out of the way of that jail where the physician or the woman is incarcerated? If that is the case, here's what's going to happen. You're going to see chaos in the world at unprecedented levels, because to the entire world, the United States government will have revealed itself to be totally illegitimate, morally, legally, constitutionally, and the markets will tank. Investor confidence in this great country, because people will interpret what that means. That means either a shooting war is coming, and obviously nothing good comes from that, or the country's breaking apart because federalism is being reasserted and Washington no longer has complete control over everything.
And remember, these go back to our founding principles.
Sure.
The states, John Taylor of Caroline said it was the ultimate act of sovereignty when the states created the general government. What people like to cite is the Supremacy Clause, the Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in the pursuance thereof, shall be the supreme law of the land. They forget that little clause, that the laws of the United States must be made in pursuance to the Constitution. Nowhere were they delegated this right to regulate. Again, 3 crimes. You mentioned that there was a federal murder statute: piracy on the high seas, counterfeiting, and treason. If the federal government goes after the duly elected governor of Oklahoma, treason is defined as waging war against the states. Who did that? Well, let's bring up another sacred cow to slaughter. St. Lincoln. He said the CSA never left, yet he waged war on them. That is treason. Go ahead, Mark.
No, this is the discussion. And I want to go one step back, even from Article 6 and the proper interpretation of Article 6. I want to go back to those 20 words, to me, that are the most important words in the Declaration of Independence, because there is no United States without these words. To secure those rights, governments derive their just powers from the consent of the governed. Now, that flipped everything on its head. They're obviously fighting with a monarch at that point and a parliament that has significant control. They're now saying in that declaration, that document we still revere, they're saying government is no longer based on its ability to exercise power and kill you. Government is now predicated on your willingness to be governed by them. Talk about a mind-blowing paradigm shift. Everybody in this listening audience needs to memorize those words, because then Jefferson dovetails off of that. And he says, what do you do when the government no longer secures those rights based on your consent? You have 3 options: alter it, abolish it, or throw it off. Folks, this is all the Fisher campaign is about. It is exercising those foundational governing principles that began these United States of America. The Constitution is not really a solution at this point because it's been bastardized into whatever anybody wants it to believe.
Whenever I would start harping on about that, getting back to the Constitution, I get these messages through Constitution,
Constitution.
And there is, we have crossed the Rubicon. There is no constitutional solution for this. I don't care if you're talking about an Article 5 convention we're gonna have an amendment saying, gosh darn it, you're gonna obey the Constitution. And they're gonna go, we never did before, and we're not about to now. So this brings us back to our three alternatives. Let's start with the very introduction of the Declaration of Independence, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, the separate and equal station for which the laws of nature and of nature's gods entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which to impel them to the separation. So as you said, dissolve that government, find another one. Now, they knew at the time that England wasn't going to say, fair enough, off you go.
Right.
They knew those were fighting words and a fight was coming. Now, fast forward to how convenient this is, because we're committing a federal crime here right now. The three of us, well, Jeff can say, I can't shut these two up. They're just going on and on. We are committing a federal crime. Title 18, United States Code 2385. Whoever knowingly or willfully advocates, aids, advises, or, this is crucial, teaches the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying the government of the United States or the government of any political subdivision therein by force or violence. That's a federal crime. Yeah. We are teaching.
Yeah, fortunately, none of us are.
Independence.
Fortunately, none of us are advocating violence because none of us are.
Teaching the duty. When you teach about the Declaration of Independence and what the solution was then, those principles still apply today.
Yeah, they have to. And I really love it, Mark, when you said that, because one of Dan Fisher's memes, that's one of my favorite ones that he posts periodically on his websites there, or Facebook page, is the one where he's sitting there on the steps and it says consent of the people or consent of the courts. And that's where we're at. Are we going to demand consent of the people, or are we just going to knuckle under to the consent of the courts?
So this is really an important issue. And it's one that I talked about for years on my previous radio shows. There is a framework by which some of these issues can be resolved. And we like to refer to that as a constitutional framework. There's another framework by which these issues likewise get resolved. And that framework is loosely referred to as a political framework. We are well past a legal framework solution to this problem, especially as it relates to the murder of the innocent unborn. And if we loosely would call the legal framework some kind of constitutional appeal to the Supreme Court or something like that, there's no relief there for this heinous crime of murder. Now that necessitates, when legal options no longer provide outcomes that are consistent with these transcendent ideas we're discussing right now, it must necessarily dictate that we move to political solutions, which is exactly where they were in 1776. Now, we also know that a statute has limitations on what it actually can do if it attempts to modify an underlying constitutional principle. It can't. Now, there is no constitutional principle at this point to resolve these issues because there's been so much usurpation of what we have come to believe were constitutional principles and frameworks to resolve these problems, i.e. Marbury versus Madison. They took upon themselves the Supreme Court took upon itself the ability to become the final arbiter. Now, there's nothing in the Constitution that suggests that.
When I went to law school and we had constitutional law, that was the first case we discussed.
Sure.
And why is that? This is what I refer to as the malfeasance of the legal education industry. Mike Meharry actually just wrote one on the malfeasance of the education industry overall. But this sets the tone for taking and being spoon-fed case law, which is what we discussed in law school, meaning the Constitution means what politically connected lawyers in their Black government-issued costumes say it was, often with the intention of effectuating their policy outcome desires. So that's what we are taught as lawyers, much like, and here's a parallel that people don't like to hear. In fact, today is supposed to be, I guess, according to Facebook, National Teacher Appreciation Day. And a friend of mine congratulated or thanked one of our teacher friends who said, "Oh, I really appreciate that. Oh, and by the way, we say the pledge every morning." Well, the Pledge of Allegiance, again, that is something that, like Marbury versus Madison, for us future lawyers, the Pledge of Allegiance sets the tone for future nationalists. And when I addressed a crowd at the Sons of Confederate Veterans Education Conference, Brian McClanahan was on the list of speakers as well. I said, this sets the tone for when the discussion of the war against Southern independence happens, that, you know what? We know from the get-go that these states were wrong to leave the Union because we are one nation, indivisible, and by golly, we are under God. Mark, do you think God is blessing us right now?
No, that's exactly. It's a very poignant comment you're making here. We believe, and every politician will end his speech, and may God bless America. May God continue to bless America. Well, it's totally inconsistent scripturally to imagine God is blessing a entity that at its core is sacrificing 1 million babies a year, in Oklahoma, 5,500 babies a year. But it necessitates at some point, this is one of the benefits of doing this kind of talk, long format talk radio, you get to actually explain yourself. So when we move from the legal and we recognize there are dead ends to the legal solutions here, you necessarily end to a political solution, which is why the Fisher campaign harkens back to the Declaration of Independence for its authority. These are foundational governing principles. Now, we all know that the Declaration of Independence was not a governing document insofar as it established a form of government and that government acted underneath there. We find that in the Articles of Confederation, which really began in 1775 and ended up getting ratified in 1783. So the Articles guided the country during the wartime. But these foundational principles that were elucidated in the Declaration must be given their due power. They must be respected because there is no government, there is no United States of America without those words in that Declaration.
And if you think about it, the left loves to embrace one term in the Declaration of Independence. And I saw this on that journey. I went to historical sites, the National Park Services, little movies in the visitor centers at Monticello and Montpelier. They have quotes from Lincoln, from Roosevelt, from Barack Obama, and they all focus on the word equal. Equality is their message. That is the only part of the Declaration of Independence they seem to care about. You never once hear about positions of liberty. You know, let's wrap this up because I want to address what Melania Trump is doing right now and see what she could really be doing if she's going to do some good. So finish up what you were going to say there. I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's okay. This goes back to what Jeff was saying there. When natural rights are being violated by government granting rights or the belief that the government has that power, you have a conflict. Don Livingston talks about this all the time. How do you resolve these conflicts? Well, initially, you'd like to think you can resolve them legally, that the documents are clear enough amongst the parties that they all agree that the foundational document is clear enough. But what happens when it's not clear? What do you do then? Now you move into making arguments. And that's where the Fisher campaign is. It is making arguments that the state of Oklahoma on equal footing with the original 13 colonies, has sovereignty, has its sovereignty, because the 13 original states had sovereignty. My goodness gracious, when you read Article 1 of the Treaty of Paris, who is the King of England ending hostilities with? Not with the United States of America. He lists the states. He recognized them as sovereigns. And even within in the confines of our first Constitution, the Articles of Confederation, Article 2 stipulates it very clearly. These are sovereign states. So if we enter the Union on equal footing with those, then Oklahoma is a sovereign state. It can exercise its sovereign powers. That's a political argument, not necessarily, it's not a constitutional argument, because the Constitution doesn't even perceive those issues. It doesn't.
And for those that think we're secessionist whack jobs, who think that we were created, or the guy that actually wrote a book about McCulloch versus Maryland was on C-SPAN recently, who said at the time of the Constitution, when it was ratified, states they formed a union with a nation. No. 13 sovereign and independent nations formed a voluntary compact. People forget about Article 7. How many people even know Article 7? And this harkens back to exactly the point you made. The ratification of the conventions of 9 states shall be sufficient for the establishment of the Constitution between the states, so ratifying the same. The states that chose not to ratify weren't going to be brought into this governmental blob to be one nation. They recognized that they were free to join or not to join. And when 3 of them reserved the right to leave at a time of their choosing, again, consistent with the principles of the Declaration of Independence, we need to remember this and have these discussions, because I tell you what, we have marijuana being very crucial to the concept of federalism. Secession is even being discussed and embraced in California. Christians, this is your chance.
I know.
Stop being cowards. Stop putting these gosh darn gay pride flags in front of your churches so you can virtue signal about how loving your God is, and be true to the word of God and stand up. You're going to put a gay pride flag in front of your church, but you're not going to do anything about babies being murdered. Good for you.
I know, Suzanne.
Because Romans.
Yeah, right. Romans 13 tells us we have to obey our governing authorities. This is a fascinating discussion, and this needs to happen a lot across the country. And I will tell you this, it is happening a lot. This whole abolitionist movement that has led to the Fisher campaign is gaining traction because it's morally superior. Every other argument is morally inferior, in some cases morally repugnant. So we're starting to see this elevation of these moral ideas reemerging, and they're really, back to the whole discussion of murder, they're really unassailable. Because everybody knows what happens to that baby isn't just that it's killed. It's been murdered. It has been murdered. There's been malice aforethought. It's been, the doctor got up that morning, brushed his teeth, got his garb on, and went to that room with the intent to take a human being's life. The mother woke up that morning, and her partner, her husband, whomever, woke up and said, brush our teeth, let's get in the car. We're going to this place where the two meet. And there's that little baby right in between. And the mother and the doctor get together, and they murder with forethought. They knew they were doing this. To the average person that I talk to, and I frame it that way, 100% of the time they nod. You're right. That's what it is. Well, if we actually believe it, like Dan Fisher has routinely said in the campaign, if we actually believed abortion was murder, we would treat it like murder. So the awakening that is happening here in Oklahoma is people are beginning to really reconcile and make consistent what they deeply believe, their convictions, with their actions. We agree it's murder, Dan. We now need to treat it like it's murder.
You know, I thought we were going to see something along these lines long before, when Project Veritas came out with those Planned Parenthood videos, and you see these ghouls laughing over the dismembered body parts of these babies. and saying, I like my chicken without the bones, meaning take the tissue off the bones, or when the heads are delivered to say, close the eyes, I don't want it looking at me, and laughing. You would think that if these people had any soul, any conscience, any human decency, it would take one little dismembered baby in their presence to say, God, forgive me, I repent. What have I done here? They laughed about it. When I had a conversation with this gentleman in Park City, he told me about a book that he had written, and I'm not going to promote it, but it was kind of a substitute, a better way of living, a different way, because the original 10 Commandments aren't good enough. And the whole message was about loving one another, all these feel-good platitudes, the garbage that we hear. But this was a gentleman who was an atheist and homosexual who said that Christians should not be able to look to the Bible. Again, this goes back to the beginning of the show, for our choices in public policy. But a gay man absolutely has a right. An atheist has a right. And again, this is cutting certain people off at the knees while proclaiming that you love one another. And those are the messages we should be proclaiming and putting forth, and isn't trying to save a human life, the most loving message of them all. And Christians, I was in a Bible study group where I said, what about when government is using my tax dollars to murder? Shouldn't I be speaking up? You know what, just pay your taxes, God will sort it out. What about Proverbs that says lead to save those that are being led to their death? Why do we just focus on Romans? Because I think it makes us just feel good about ourselves. And isn't that really, Mark, why people listen to conservative radio and they hear about how great their side is? And now that we've got the White House and both houses of Congress, by golly, it's time to put our progressive plans into play. We're going to usurp the state's rights and state sovereignty because, gosh darn it, national reciprocity is a really good thing. And by the way, here's something. We have an executive order that just came out. Donald Trump, and how many conservatives cheered this on? Trump signs an order to protect religious freedom and establish a new White House faith initiative. So we have a government that has disregarded the constitutional restriction, keeping them out of establishing or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. They threw off that yoke. Well, clearly the only solution is more government.
Yeah.
Did you see that? And have you seen the response? And people say, well, this is great.
Yeah, sure. It's really an alarming trend that we see oddly enough, in both camps. As you said a moment ago, both camps use the dominant force of Washington, D.C. to compel the other side to do what they want. And they may use the term constitutional or try to hide it under this guise of it's a constitutional power. But the reality is all they've done is acquired power and now trying to force it upon the other side they disagree with or dislike. This is a very troubling development. And it's not a new development. It's been going on for decades. But we see it culminating in things like this. It goes back to a little bit what Jeff was saying a few moments ago about the difference between natural rights and constitutional rights. There are no constitutional rights per se. We claim there are because we use things like Jeff said, I have a Second Amendment right. No, you have an unalienable right to defend yourself by whatever means you believe necessary. And government is infringed. The federal government, in this particular case, is infringed. Prevented from infringing upon that right. This is why language is important. Why terms that we use to discuss these issues are important. Because if we don't understand the language behind that is being used to describe these issues, very often we wander off into places that actually grant government more power, like we're going to sign an executive order protecting the religious liberties of faith communities. Well, number one, we already have the natural right, the unalienable right to live our lives as faith communities the way we want to. And no government should ever suppress that or intervene in that, or blah, blah, blah. But by signing an executive order and looking like a Moses freeing the slaves, we've acknowledged our slave status. We've secretly said, we are slaves and we need President Trump to free us from that slavery. Well, again, we got to step back and think this through, because I think so often, so much is done, even with good motives, is done knee-jerk, as in a response to some other knee-jerk idea. And before you know it, you have a country, a set of laws that are governing based on knee-jerk-itis. Well, if the states would assert their sovereign authority, there would never be a need for Donald Trump's executive order. But the reality is the states refuse to assert, at least to this date, refuse to assert their sovereign authority against the federal government trying to infringe on anything. Now, oddly enough, this is really problematic about this particular executive order. Most of the infringement cases are not coming from the federal government. They're coming from your state governments that you don't pay attention to, because you think the federal government's, not you, Suzanne or Jeff, because you think the federal government's the be-all, end-all. We only listen to Rush Limbaugh. Little do you know, there have been human rights commissions that have been developed in many states that have regulatory authority to require non-discrimination policies on bakers, florists. And yet, when that happens, we don't quite know how to deal with it. We think it's a federal issue. We think, well, why isn't Congress going to do something about this? Number one, you don't want Congress doing anything about it. But sadly enough, most Christian evangelicals do want Congress to do something about it. They actually do want them to pass laws that stop their state from doing certain things. But then when it gets turned on them, and the progressives use federal law against it, well, that's wrong. You can't. That's unconstitutional. You can't do that. There's this kind of inconsistency we've all grown comfortable with, and we've got to find a way to get back to consistency, because the problem is actually in your state, and religious liberties are being infringed there most of the cases. Now, there is public access, federal statutes on public access, and the Americans with Disability Act and all that. But the reality is most of these stories about the florists, the bakers, all these guys, the people who own wedding chapels, those are happening at your state level. You better work within your state. And as I've said many times on the air over the years, you have three options when your state gets out of control. You can stay and adapt to it because you just love living there and it's a great state. You say, okay, well, doesn't affect me. It's not that big of a deal.
The weather's really nice.
Yeah, like the mountains, all that. You can stay. That's right. You can stay and you can fight. You can try to get a movement going to stop it within your state, or you can leave the state. Well, when federal policy, which Trump just signed, executive policy that now affects all 50 states, takes over, there's no place to run to. You don't have any place to go. I mean, you can go to another country in theory, but often they're worse than what we have it here. We're trying to stop it from getting to where they are. But you don't have places to run to. This has always been the genius of federalism, this idea that the states are acting sovereignly, but they empower a central government to do a few limited things. It's always been the genius behind the theory. It hasn't worked out that well, but it's behind the theory. But the reality is most of these religious discrimination issues are not coming from the federal government. They're coming from your state government. And like I said, the problem is people just don't pay attention to their state government.
And the problem is people run to the federal judiciary for redress.
Right.
And they do the same thing in California. They cheer when there is a federal court overturning a California state firearms law. Well, they can't violate the Second Amendment. And we just don't understand, and then when I criticize King Trump, let's say it, we have a royal family because Queen Melania now, here's our newest sacred cow. Queen Melania now has her own little platform. Right. I think honestly, she's tried to stay out of the limelight. Yeah, me too. I think we've become so accepting of a royal family, our first couple. We have our king and our first lady, and they have to have a platform. But, when we have, again, this mentality that Washington, D.C. is our answer, and we have the tax cut, the temerity of King Trump to say this is a tremendous Christmas gift to the American people. Oh, shut up. I don't need your handouts. What I need you to do is get this lying bunch of Republican thieves who have promised on 4 election cycle campaigns to repeal Obamacare, not repeal and replace, to honor their promise. Then we wouldn't need your stinking tax cuts, because we'd all be 10 grand better off at least by the end of every year. Trump was also at the NRA ILA convention, and he said that our Second Amendment rights, and Jeff, I'm glad you caught me saying that earlier. I was waiting for your commentary. Our Second Amendment rights are under siege while I am president. And I don't want to hear this, well, he's better than Hillary crap. This isn't either or. I want consistency, Mark. We call balls and strikes on both sides.
That's
while
right.
I am president, they will not be under siege. Oh, really? Didn't you just sign that omnibus bill with expanded background checks and outlawing the bump stock? Don't tell me about this. We shouldn't even be talking about the Second Amendment. General government has no authority, and people shouldn't. In fact, we shouldn't. I would be okay if half the population didn't know who our president was.
Yeah, okay.
We are supposed to play such a minor role; it shouldn't even affect us. Jeff, I know you're fighting to get in here between us, blabbermouths.
It's so hard. You two just go back and forth. It's like watching ping pong all this whole 2 hours. Anyway, I want to go back. This whole idea of conservative, liberal is complete hogwash. There is no such thing anymore. We've been so indoctrinated. We're all good Marxists, with exceptions. We're all good Marxists. We all like our big government as long as our big government Marxists are in charge. So we want our big government Marxists that's going to say, we're going to give you your Second Amendment rights. Or we're going to like our good Marxist rulers that say, we're going to give you the right to choose. It's all the same thing. There is no liberal. There is no conservative. It's all Marxism. We've accepted the whole Marxist idea. We have implemented all 10 pillars of communism. So stop with the whole idea that we can fix it there, because, yes, we need to go back to the Declaration where we were a little while ago. We have a royal family, and until we decide how we're going to separate and go our own way peacefully, because we can do this peacefully. Look at the USSR. It broke up, and for the most part, there was a little violence in one or two of the states. But for the most part, it broke up peacefully. There was no tanks rolling in, and it can be done. We can do it here, too. And that we need to have a declaration and just work towards getting there. We love to embrace
the status quo. And here at Cerberus Radio Network, you're listening to Jeff Johnson, Suzanne Sherman, Mark Kreslins. We are trying to get you to shake off the shackles of the status quo. California is having an adult conversation, California of all places, about secession. Secession is not the be-all, end-all. It's not going to destroy this concept of the American people. We have to disassociate and distance ourselves from this bipartisan, illegitimate, morally bankrupt, de facto, national as opposed to federal government. It is not, I hate this phrase, it's not who we are. That's not who we are. The American people are the victims of this government. We need to think about ways where we can retake the control, be consenting to the government source, to, that we are going to be respectful of. Nobody respects this government on either side. They're either doing too much or they're not doing enough. And before people say, well, you just hate America, I hate the fact that government has become our God, lowercase g, referring to my article by the 10th Amendment Center. It's called the Church of the National Government. With regards to St. Lincoln, if you go to his memorial, here's the inscription. In this temple, as in the hearts of the people, temple as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. So you go to your Church of National Government, You get on your knee and you genuflect before the man who is personally responsible for the deaths of 850,000 Americans, not to free the slaves, but to collect a freaking tax. There's your God. And what's the result of that? 850,000. That was just the opening act. Now we're up to 60 million. Nice job to the nationalists. Do I hate America? I love America. I hate this government that is turning us against each other, that is sanctioning murder. Let me just interject by letting you understand there's a difference between patriotism and nationalism. Going to read a quick passage by George Orwell. He wrote an article in 1945, and this is so important. We have all become nationalists. Lincoln was very, very heavily influenced by the Marxists who emigrated here from Europe. George Orwell said, "By nationalism, I mean the habit of identifying oneself with a single nation or other unit, placing it beyond good and evil." Evil is going on right here, folks. Recognizing no other duty than that of advancing its interests. Nationalism is not to be confused with patriotism. That's what we're espousing here, folks. Patriotism. Both words are normally used in so vague a way that any definition is liable to be challenged, but one must draw a distinction between them, since two different and even opposing ideas are involved. And this is really important. By patriotism, I mean devotion to a particular place and a particular way of life, which one believes to be the best in the world, but has no wish to enforce on other people. Patriotism is of its nature defensive, both militarily and culturally. Nationalism, on the other hand, is inseparable from the desire for power. The abiding purpose of every nationalist is to secure more power and more prestige, not for himself, but the nation or other unit in which he has chosen to sink his own individuality. We are surrendering our individuality for this progressive collective. Robert E. Lee had said that if they were to lose their cause, a central government, paraphrasing, would be despotic at home, tyrannical at home, and despotic abroad. Boy, was that prophetic.
Well, you know, interestingly enough, this is kind of one of the silver linings of where we are right now, right? The left is actually, once again, leading in accordance with its deep convictions. And we're benefiting from that because we are talking about California secession. We are talking about federalism. It was, oddly enough, it seemed like it was always going to take the left leading on these ideas because the conservatives really don't have the courage of their convictions. I've come to embrace or believe that talk radio, there's a certain amount of salve that comes with complaining, that we've replaced solutions with complaining, and that if we can properly identify the problem and just talk about the problem, somehow that soothes our conscience. We walk away from 3 hours with Rush saying, "Phew, I feel better because I agreed with the problems." Yet the left is saying, "Okay, we got problems now with this Trump guy in the White House. Let's get some solutions going real quick here. Let's break away from the union." Now look how quickly that happened. Here, conservatives, quote unquote, have been complaining for how many years has Limbaugh been on? 3 decades now, maybe 4 decades. Been complaining about the problem for 35, 40 years. No solutions other than, well, we just need to get a GOP Congress and White House. Well, we've had that a few times. No solutions from that. Well, we need to get better Supreme Court justices. Well, we've had a lot of Supreme Court justices for the last 40 years, and that doesn't seem to solve anything. Well, okay, so none of our solutions are working. Let's just keep complaining. Let's dial into AM, whatever station, and let's agree with Rush for another 5 years about how bad things are.
And those rotten Democrats, by golly,
yeah,
I'm a Republican. That's right. I'm a good guy.
That's exactly right. Progressives, on the other hand, we got a problem. Let's come up with a real solution. Let's get out of the union. And I think here again, the Democrats, the progressives, actually follow their convictions. They actually do something off of their convictions. We're just really good at talking. We're really good at feeling better about ourselves because we've expressed a problem. And yet, in the context of abortion, in the context of the unalienable right to protect yourself, the unalienable right to free association, all we do is talk. We don't ever actually do anything. We just talk about how bad it is. And there's something wrong fundamentally in that approach to life, that all I'm going to do is talk about how bad things are. This is where I talk about, I believe talk radio has missed a golden opportunity, because it actually could have provided real solutions. It could actually offer some of the things we're talking about today.
But you know
what?
If
Large audience.
They'd go broke. No advertisers would have the temerity to support what we are saying, because you would see what would happen from the left. They would shame them and they'd go under. I mean, I have to say about the left, they are in it to win it.
Oh yeah, totally.
They have taken what we have now. They have the trifecta of evil: the government, the education system, and the media. The latter two, again, regulated by the former, with licensing, regulation, and they know it's a matter of time. We are raising a populace of pajama boys, I see when we were in Salt Lake City the other night, and these high school kids, these girls are just all over these guys who are blatantly gay. It's almost like we have to virtue signal and embrace these guys. Every guy out there, where are the men? Where are the men in this society? They know if they raise a population of guys like this, there will not be a fight. Connecticut is the latest state to say we are going to surrender our electoral college votes to what the popular vote is. So we're going to have now a de facto democracy, which was something the electoral college was intended to avoid. And again, we keep embracing, well, that's okay, because that's what the nation wants. And going back to when we talked about our royal family, Melania Trump, Jeff, do we have time where I know we're running short? She has a campaign now. She has a platform, and her initiative is going to be to help the children who are victims of the opioid crisis. Well, for crying out loud, who created this opioid crisis? The federal government. I have another article out, Parchment and Plants, what we can learn about federal prohibition and marijuana. The solution from the general government is always more policies, more platforms from the general government. I criticized Sacred Cow Melania Trump the other day for having this platform. I think she should have just stood quiet. And one person said, well, where were you when Michelle Obama was doing her school lunch program? And I said, oh, mark my words, I was squawking then too. I'm not going to be quiet now because Queen Melania is taking up Queen Obama's, which Obama would that be? I'm sorry. Okay. Her platform, I'm not okay with either one. These solutions don't come from these. What we need is less government, not more. Yet their solution is always, we created a crisis, we're going to solve it. Again, Trump was very disingenuous in his statement to the NRA that our Second Amendment rights are secure with him. He's already selling them down the river. We've got a guy in California. They're not even trying to hide it now because we have capitulated so much. They can come right out and say, this guy from California, representative, we need a mandatory buyback program in the United States. This isn't just a California representative under their 10th Amendment reserved rights, state powers. This is a member of Congress, United States Congress, advocating for a mandatory gun surrender program. They should have put in the Constitution. We have that the politicians, the president, congressmen, and senators must take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution. What's the punishment for failing to do so? Yeah. Nothing at all. They should have said, there's going to be a fourth crime. And that is by our elected representatives abrogating their oath. The penalty shall be death. Don't even entertain this garbage. But they get away with it, and people cheer them on.
Well, this has been, as I was saying earlier, we see this kind of coming to a head in my view. I think this is building to some kind of a ultimate remedy. And what I'm beginning to see is, like I mentioned earlier, a remascularization of this debate from our side of the equation. And when I say mascularization, I think you know what I mean. It goes back to your comment a few moments ago, where are the men? Well, where are the strong women as well? So we need both. But I'm beginning to see more and more people, because we're now defining the terms of these debates. We're beginning to define the terms of these debates properly. They're actually becoming more courageous to actually take stands and take positions on these issues. Where formerly, when the generals in the conservative movement retreated constantly to progressive terminology, the troops were left, kind of to be nothing more than battlefield chum at that point. Excuse me, because we didn't know how to answer the arguments. Well, now a new set of generals are beginning to emerge that are now saying, here's a better way to go on the offensive. And I think we're seeing more, and we're going to see more and more of this unfold in the coming years. We're going to see our side of the equation, whether you call them conservatives, Christians, evangelicals, whatever you call them, we're going to see them begin to muster around these transcendent truths, these common sense morality. Going back to what Jeff said a few moments ago, I think you said it, Suzanne. Napolitano argues that these unalienable rights come because of our humanity. So even if you are like we shared, our good friend Andrew Avery, and you don't believe in a transcendent God, because of our sheer humanity, we acknowledge that we have these unalienable rights. This is one of the powers of Judge Napolitano's argument, is our humanity separates us from the animal kingdom. We're not squirrels, we're human beings. And the very fact of our humanity imbues us with these rights, these unalienable rights that cannot be leaned by the government. So I'm beginning to see more and more people come to this conclusion. They've kind of gotten off the fix of the Reagan era, where finally conservatives had a seat at the table. We're kind of coming down off of that high and realizing that high got us nowhere. That high just actually grew government. And now people are coming to the cold, harsh realities that we don't have much time here to fix this. We have a window. And, you know my position on Trump. I didn't vote for him myself, but in a weird kind of way, it's a little bit of a window right now, primarily from our position down here in Oklahoma. He actually sent us a letter endorsing our previous effort to abolish abortion down here. So we're going to call upon him to side with Oklahoma when Dan Fisher wins the governorship, and stand with Oklahoma as we assert our state sovereign right. So I think we got this little weird window right now. Whether it emerges and we step all the way through remains to be seen. Whether we dip our toe in, get a little nervous and back up, we don't know. But I do see, Suzanne, a mascularization of this discussion, and I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, and again, we are so fortunate, blessed to have this forum where we can speak out. There was a time when we would never, ever have this opportunity because of you're limited to how many airwave, outlets there are out there. Now, anybody can have this platform, right? And it needs to be told. You will not go to any other radio station on the air right now and hear what we are saying. We are too truthful for terrestrial. And if you're listening to us for the first time and you're feeling uncomfortable about things, good, because I was too when I first heard this. You know, where are the Samuel Adams? Where are the John Hancocks? Where are the Thomas Paines? Where are the Patrick Henrys in modern day radio? They're not there. You have to come someplace for places like this. Cerberus Radio Network. We will tell you the truth, even if you don't like hearing it. People are coming around, people are starting to listen, and people are paying attention. I want people to please support Dan Fisher for Governor. Go to his website, Dan Fisher for Governor. There's a big red donate button. Also, free the states. I think we're about out of time. Mark Kreslins, I want to thank you for joining me today. This has just been an awesome show. I love having us on the air together. And anytime you have a free morning, I would love to get you back. I know people love having us on here. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Jeff Johnson, thank you for producing and trying to get in a word edgewise. Don't feel bad. When I hosted Mark's show, he couldn't even get on his own show with me yapping away. So I want to thank you all for listening. God bless you, everybody.